Hello and welcome back. No reviews of Chinese microphones and things like that today. I thought I'd take you on a bit of a nostalgia trip for me. I've been playing bass instruments primarily since I was a kid. I mean, in the UK we have primary school from 5 to 11. And when I was about 9 I started playing the cello. And I moved it over to the new school when I moved at 11. And this is me sitting there playing the cello. I was always lazy. I mean, I'm sure my teacher, based on what I know now, my teacher knew that I wasn't practicing properly. But I liked playing bass. The only trouble was I got thrown out of an orchestra. I got told that it would be much better if I played the composer's version of the bass part rather than the one that I just made up myself. And I figured that sort of classical music and me needed to sort of part. So I gave it up. When I got to about 15, I was interested in sort of, bands and things like that. So I decided to buy a bass guitar, an electric bass guitar. And I was 15. I didn't have any money. Mum and Dad didn't really think that, playing electric instruments was particularly appropriate because you needed these amplifier things and stuff like that. But I managed to bodge it. I actually had an old radiogram with tubes in it, and I managed to bodge it so I could plug my electric guitar into it, and then I stuck it into a 15-inch speaker that I'd managed to cadge from somewhere, and that was my start. And the guitar that I bought second hand, and it's called a Landola. It's made in Finland. At the time it must have been cheap. I honestly can't remember how much I paid. It must have been cheap. And I struggled a bit. I was sort of learning on my own. So I decided that it would be much better if it didn't have frets. So I pulled the frets out, filled in the grooves that were left, and that's what I started on. Mainly because my fingers were very well used to playing fretless instruments. So it was sort of quite straightforward in a way. So I started on this de-fretted Landola. And the really bizarre thing is that they're actually now available on AliExpress. You can buy a copy of one. So have a look at this, which is the copy of one, and then we'll have a look at the real one. There we go. It's quite wear-worn. It's got a lot of dings, although I suppose on old guitars that's considered to be good now, isn't it? The only thing really that's wrong with it is the little rubber band that goes around one of the volume knobs. They're made out of rubber and it goes over the top of the knob, and that's presumably perished and fell off at some point. Landola are still making guitars in Finland. So, it's pretty obvious what it's designed to look a bit like, isn't it? Period guitar of the time, I suppose. So when I bought this, I don't know how old it was. So I'm guessing this probably dates back to something like 73, something like that. And they are the original strings. I've never changed them. I'm not one of those people that does change strings. At some point, there must have been a pick guard. So I'm not quite sure where it went, but there's a screw there, giveaway screw. So at some point, there was something on here. Goes up to the little screw in the hole. But it's quite a pretty guitar, isn't it? It's a bit crazed and things on the back. But, it's okay. It's a bit dull. It's always been dull. I mean, no doubt a change of strings would make it a bit brighter, wouldn't it? But it's always been a bit dull. The only thing I did do to it to help me probably ruin quite a lot of the value of the guitar. Can you see on here? I've actually filed out some grooves. So to help me play in tune and work out where things were, I actually filed some holes. Because when you fill in the lines on one of these things, you've got to put your fingers in different places from what you appear. So It's a bit wrong, but I just filed the thing so my thumb would sit on these things, and if my thumb was in one of the little grooves that I'd notched, then my fingers would be in the right place. That was my sort of cunning plan, and it did sort of work. The trouble, of course, is that with the conventional wire wound strings, sliding produces lots of noises. Which is a bit nasty, but I sort of learned to live with it, really. I quite liked it, but it was never a particularly nice sounding guitar when it had frets on, and taking the frets off actually made it worse, to be perfectly honest. And I didn't really get on with it. So what actually happened was, when it got round to about 76, when I joined my first band, I didn't play bass because they already had a bass player. So I had to go and buy a 6-string electric, which is what I did. And I played guitar for a few years. And after that, I decided it was time to go back to playing bass, which, to be honest, is what I'm happiest on. So I bought another one. Let's have a look at that. So when I eventually went back to playing bass, I decided that I would buy a 5-string. I'd never heard of them before, to be honest, and I saw people using them. And I thought, well, yeah, I'll get one. But I didn't know anything about them at all. So what I bought was this. It's a Vesta. I don't think that's a proper brand. It's certainly not a brand I've ever heard of. It was in the local music shop. I played it. And the reason I bought it was because it had 5 strings. I didn't know much about 5 strings, but it seemed there was one more than 4, so it's obviously going to be good. But the best thing was that the neck was pretty much the same sort of size as the Landola that I'd played before. And of course, being electric and plugging it in and not being an acoustic, it had a much brighter tone. So I quite liked it. And it's quite nicely designed, I think. 2 volumes, 2 tones. But the strings are a bit close together. But I only know that because later on, of course, most of the basses that I bought have got wider necks. But, you know, at the time I thought, oh yeah, it's great, but they are a bit close together. This one is quite nice. Long scale. It's got a nice tone. But the weird bit is I never got on very well with the B string. If you actually grab hold of it, you can pull it about. The tension on that B string is really, really quite low. So if you play it too loud, it flaps about and whacks into the frets like this. You know, it hits around about the 5th fret. It also means that it's quite indistinct. So if I just play that B, it's mostly down the bottom and there's not much in the way of harmonics above. And I've discovered over the years that it's the harmonics that let you know that things are right. And if there aren't too many, it's a bit dull and a bit lifeless. And I played this quite often, certainly going around doing little sort of small shows and things, easy listening, sort of girl singer, keys, bass, and drums. And it was sort of, we did that for a long time. That's a pretty nice way of doing things. And we did lots of stuff in the mid-90s, that would have been. So in the mid-90s onwards, I started to play this thing, and it's okay. It developed a sort of a buzz, and I've discovered that in actual fact, the buzz is clearly coming from the truss rod banging up against the edge of the channel. So it's probably a little bit too tight in there, and it's just got a little bit sort of rattly and buzzy. But tone-wise, with the active pickups that it's got, it's actually not too bad at all. it's okay. And I played this for quite a long time until I decided that I really needed to get something else. At this point, I needed a proper bass, one that would let me play and be paid. I guess that's the way to look at it. You know, a bass that was reliable, sounded good, was easy to play, and instead of sort of trying to fight the bass, I thought the simplest thing to do would be to go to a music shop and just play them all, but not look at the price tickets. There was a danger that I was going to find, oh wow, this one's like so much money that I could never afford it. But I figured what I won't do is go in with any sort of preconceived ideas. So I just went in, played them all, and if I played it for 5 seconds and didn't like it, it went back on the shelf. I just hooked it back, got another one, and I went on and on and on and on until I found one that I really liked. And I liked the sound of this one, and I liked the look of it. And then I looked at the price ticket, discovered it wasn't actually mega expensive at all. And this is what I ended up with, a PV International. And it's actually really nice. It's got sort of this rather nice sort of red sort of patterned sort of effect. You can see the grain from underneath. And it's really nice. It's a bit odd. There's no pickup selector. So you've got volume and tone for each of the two pickups, but there's no switch to go between them, so you have to use knobs. And that didn't particularly bother me because I tended to find I found a tone I like and then I never adjust it. I'm just happy leaving it as it is. The odd thing is it doesn't have a pickup selector. It's got a volume control and a tone control for each pickup, and that's it, which doesn't bother me at all. I tend to sort of use one sort of particular tone and very little adjustment of the volume and leave it there. So it was never a problem to me. A lot of people thought it was a bit strange though, a bass that doesn't have a pickup selector, but it's got two pickups. Oh well. So what have we got? Well, the main difference from that previous guitar is that the tension on the strings here is higher, which means that you can play that bottom B, and it's a proper note. It's not just a sort of noise. The other bass, it was very low tension, and when you played the bottom B, it just flapped about a lot. It wasn't like a proper note. This one does. And the reason for wanting these 5 strings, well, a lot of songs that I played were in E flat, and it was a bit of a nuisance if you actually had a bass that was in E, and then you had to go and play a song in B flat, because the only option you got was either playing the low notes an octave up, or, as a friend of mine, Pete, did, he just had 2 basses. So on one song, he'd play the Fender, or whatever it was, which was tuned conventionally in E, and then he'd have a completely separate bass that he would swap to that was tuned in E flat. And that was the only way really to cope with the two. There was no possibility of tuning between songs. That was a bit daft. But that was enough for me to think, well, I really need a bass that I can play an E flat if I need to. So that's what I decided to do. This one would let me do all that. And I mean, if I play sort of like that's an E played on the B string, there's hardly any difference between those two. Most of the other stuff, well, it's got a nice tone. I like it. And this is with the tone controls full and both volume controls full. So basically, both pickups turned up full. I quite like that tone. If you want to do that. It's got nice sustain. It's quite easy to play. It doesn't really sort of do anything that annoys me. And if you play any of that sort of rockier stuff that's got lots of open strings, where you spend the entire song going, that sort of thing, the open strings sound nice, but they don't sound drastically different from the fretted ones. I like this. and I've had it a long time now. I've not particularly looked after it. I don't look after anything, being very honest. But it's been trouble-free. It stays in tune. And through preference, I like to play this guitar. The snag is, it's actually got quite a low action, which is, it's easy and it's not hard on the fingers. You don't need much effort to actually fret them. But it does mean that if you play really loud on it, then you'll thwack the strings. If you sort of do too much sort of heavy stuff, and if you play sort of songs that really need to be played like that, it gets a bit clacky as the strings keep hitting the frets. So I decided that, you know, I didn't play much of that stuff at the time. I could live with it. And of course, then I got a bit carried away. So I moved on to another one, just because I fancied it. What came next was a 6-string. I don't know why I bought a 6-string. I didn't need a 6-string. But I thought, yeah, you know, I ought to have one. I don't know why. I'm also one of those bass players that is very comfy sort of down the bottom end. I don't play chords up the top. It's just not what I do. I'm just one of those people that don't like the twiddly bits up the top. I think if you're a bass player, stay down the bottom. Leave the other stuff to the others. So what I got was this. Well, this was made by an independent guitar maker who I believe was called something like Chris Hoy or Chris House. I really don't know. Couldn't find out anything about him. It seems to have sort of no real, you know, doesn't look like anything, does it? It's just quite a nice guitar to play. I mean, I bought it when I played it, and I thought, yeah, it's nice. It's got all the features that Peavy's got. The action's quite low, tension is quite high. I mean, it's got a high string extra, I suppose, that I've got tuned up to C, so I can play, you know, same finger patterns, just higher. But I really don't know why I bought it. I mean, it does sound nice. I mean, and the bottom B, it's a little bit more flappy than that PV, but it's when you play it in E flat, it's okay. And it sounds okay, I think, to my ears. And the best thing was, it got those same 4 knobs, no pickup selector, which I'd sort of got used to on the PV, and it seemed to have sort of been copied through to this one. So, all in all, it's quite nice. I mean, the head, the neck's bolted on like that on the back. I hardly ever play it. I guess I could. I mean, probably if for some reason I couldn't play the PV, I would probably pick this one as a second one. But the thing for me is the neck's just too wide. I mean, 5 strings have got to be wider than a 4 string, of course. But the extra on the 6 string makes the neck really chunky. And it does mean that you have to move your hand about a little bit more. It's this sort of stuff, you know. If you're playing that note with your first finger on the B string, to get up there, you've got to sort of move your hand round. So the comfiest position. It sort of has to go across as you move up, and I never found that particularly easy. The string spacing is about the same as that PV, so that's not a problem. It's just the extra width is just a bit too much. And the other killer, of course, it's really heavy, as you'd expect. So then, you know, this one was sort of relegated to sort of the also played guitar. What actually happened then was, by that time I was in a Beach Boys band, and I was playing that PV initially. So the PV was fine, apart from a couple of songs where, as I mentioned, when they had to be a bit louder, it got a bit clackier. So I figured that what I really needed to do was buy another guitar, so buy another bass, that I could have with a slightly higher action, and then I could play the more louder stuff that I needed to do, where you have to just hit it a bit harder, and I could play it without the sort of clackiness. So I went on the hunt for another bass, and what I ended up buying was this. I bought a Fender 5-string American Jazz. Now this is by no means the nicest to play. In actual fact, it's probably the hardest to play. The string tension is a bit too much perhaps, but it did me pretty good service with the band. Now I have actually tweaked this one. All the other ones are exactly as they were when they were bought, but this one has had a few changes over its lifetime. Mainly I swapped the pickups. I got some pickups. What the hell are they? Wilkinsons. I don't know why. Someone told me, I think, that they sounded good, so I got some Wilkinsons. But you might notice something else if I just hold it up. Yep, it's got glow-in-the-dark strings on it. And you might ask, why did I put glow-in-the-dark strings on it? Well, the answer was just for fun, really. I just saw them advertised. I actually bought them from Thomann in Germany, and I just saw a set of fluorescent bass strings, and they're sort of like covered, so they are like wrapped with this sort of strange sort of coating. It's not like plastic, they're just coated. And of course we were playing on lots of stages where you have lots of LED lighting, and that was what impressed me. I'll turn the lights out in a minute and you can see what I mean. It's really quite childish, but by this stage of my life I hadn't really bothered about sort of following trends and things like that, and the sacrilege element of putting sort of fluorescent strings on a bass didn't bother me. I just thought it was quite fun. But it's nice, because it's a nice bass. It's not quite as high output with these pickups as the PV is, and I've got the thing with a fairly high action, mainly because there's a couple of songs that sort of we were playing, and then for the second chorus it was, and I don't use a pick. I've got really tough fingernails, and so I always play that. So when I would be going normally, which is, played with the pad of my finger, we'd then launch into the chorus, and the PV clacks like a good one, but I can palm mute it down here, and I would actually be playing like that, which is probably the hardest I've ever played a bass in my life, and I just couldn't do that on the PV. The high action's a bit of a pain for everything else, of course, but I suppose there's not much you can do about it. You can't really. I didn't want to start getting to the guitar swapper thing, so it all had to be done on this. But it's nice, and there's a little bit of a back bow on the neck, which I've never bothered to do anything about because it actually works for what I'm doing. But it's harder to play. But I think on stage it sort of worked okay. It's not a bass that I'd probably use for any other type of gig. It was just good, chucked into the case, and then we just throw it in the back of the van. It never caused me any problems. It was always stable. In actual fact, I've just realised I haven't actually played it for a year. And I've got it out of the case and it's in tune. It never occurred to me to think about tuning this one up. I had to tune the others. But this is really, really stable. Hence why I'm not fiddling about with it, not messing about. It has got high action. It is more difficult to play, but it doesn't buzz. It doesn't sort of vibrate. And of course it has the rather interesting light up strings on it. But it's all right, but you probably have to just practice a bit. It'd probably take me an hour of playing it to sort of remember this is how it has to be played. It's all right. And it sort of became a favourite, but only really for the band. I didn't play it for anything else, but it was reliable, it was tough, it would survive the being chucked onto aeroplanes and things like that. When you watch the cargo handlers sort of treat things that are delicate by only throwing them a short distance. But I quite like this. And again, it was the sort of thing that I would turn everything up full and very rarely adjust it. Just didn't need to do it. The sort of stock tone that it had for me was okay. And of course I never used any effects on these things whatsoever. So all in all, this is one of my favourites, but for quite weird reasons. I wonder if I can conjure up the play in the dark. I'll see if I can do it so you can see what the strings look like when they're lit up. Hang on. Well, silly really, wasn't it? But there we go. It kept me happy. Along the way, I've also had some other basses. And because my very first 6-string I sold, and I decided that was a real mistake. Ever since then, I've never sold a guitar. So my 6-string electric, it was a Strat copy. A Japanese Strat copy, which it was actually quite nice, and that was in the 70s, and that's what I played for quite a while. And when I went back to bass, I actually sold it because someone offered me some money, and so I took it, and I sort of regretted that. So I've never sold any instrument since then. I just collect them and keep them. But along the way, odd things have appeared. A friend of mine, we were doing panto together one year, and she wanted to learn bass guitar, she said, but she was quite petite. So the long scale basses that I have, typically 34-inch sort of type basses, they were just too big for her to physically hold because she looked a bit ridiculous with this enormous guitar. So, when she was trying to play one of my basses, she just frankly looked a bit daft. So she said, were there sort of smaller ones? And there are. And I found a cheap Chinese one being sold by a dealer that looked, more of sort of her style. So I bought it for her. And when it came, they'd sent a fretless instead of a fretted one, which was fine for me, I suppose. I would have been happy with it. No good for her. She wanted something with frets. So the dealer wasn't particularly sort of keen just to sort of swap them over, but he offered me the fretless one at a bit of a silly price. So I thought, well, I'll keep that. And so she got her fretted one. It arrived a couple of days later, and I kept the short scale fretless bass. No real sort of intention of using it, but I don't sell them, so I've still got it. So have a look at this one. It's meant to be a sort of precision style copy. It's got quite a nice neck actually, but it's short. The whole thing is sort of shrunk down. One of the bands that I used to sort of do a bit of work with years ago was the Searchers, and their bass guitarist used to play a precision, and he was actually quite short, and he had that problem that, it was on him a huge bass. So something like this, shorter scale, for smaller people, yeah, maybe it's got a market. I mean, doesn't sound too bad. But again, it's got round wound strings on, so it probably makes more noise sitting in the room listening to it than it does that gets recorded, but there's still that. But with this particular one, the frets are actually quite, the markers they put in are quite wide, so that's actually better. And I guess for sort of a beginner, this is actually not too bad, really. It doesn't sound too horrid. Although I can hear a bit of a vibration there, I'm not sure where that's coming from. But plays okay. And for people with smaller hands, I can see these having a little home. The construction's not bad. The action's a bit high, but in actual fact, it's quite reminiscent of double bass action. But of course, there is that tonal shift between the finger and the open string. Which is quite noticeable, really. Most fretlesses have got that sort of problem, really, but there is a difference between your finger and what else. Can't really do much about that. But it was a sort of peculiar thing to think about buying, but I'm glad I didn't send it back, because I have used it a few times. So it's quite easy to play. It's not bad sounding. The hardware's pretty typical of a sort of cheap bass, but it's okay. Got one other one to show you, and I think this is almost certainly a fake guitar. I didn't pay a huge amount of money for it, and I've never actually played a real one, and so I suspect this one is probably a Chinese copy, and it's this. It's a Music Man Stingray 5, fretless, so it's not particularly common. Now, when I got it, I didn't really spot anything that sort of rang any warning bells with me, because, to be perfectly honest, I'd never actually laid my hands on a real one. And since I bought it, I discovered something a bit odd. And the pickup selector is in the wrong place. It's here, and it's on the wonk. All the pictures I can find of real ones, that is always horizontal, and on here it's at a 45-degree angle. So I don't think that's right. So I'm pretty content that it's actually a copy. It doesn't actually bother me, because it's actually quite a nice bass. It's got flat wound strings on it, so it actually sounds quite nice. It actually feels a bit like you're playing a double bass. The sort of feel of the strings is the same, because it's got flats on, but it's quite nice. looks all right though, doesn't it? I quite like this. So as they go, it's quite a nice guitar. Again, all the knobs turned up full for me. Pickup selector, wrong place. Well, okay. Bit crackly somewhere. Not sure about the bottom B. That bottom B, in actual fact, is a little bit dead because the strings that it's got on it are not quite long enough. If you look up here, the cotton wrap on that bottom B string is sitting on top of the nut because the string is about 5mm too short, which is a bit of a pain, and it makes that bottom B a bit dull. But most of the time I've got a finger on it. It's very rare you actually play the open B, is it? So in most times you've got your fingers up here somewhere, so it doesn't really matter. But the open B does sort of get dulled down a bit because of that, which is a bit of a shame, but not much I can do about it. So yet another interesting bass that I've got in the collection. Again, I don't play it very often, but this does get a bit of use. Probably could do with playing more, to be honest, but it's just that fretlesses and me, well, if I've got a job that needs the fretless, the chances are it'll probably be better on the double bass. But there we go. So yet again, a few little sort of war scars on it, but it's been quite nice, and it does stay in tune. I'm 99% certain this is a fake guitar, but I don't really mind. It's got a place in the collection after all. The last one that I want to show you today was one that I bought basically for a project that I was doing, and the person it was for wanted as authentic sound as they could get. They were doing some Beatles stuff. Now, I've never had one of these. So, for one project, it seemed a bit silly to sort of spend a huge amount of money buying Hofner. So I bought this. I thought it said Poe when I bought it. It's actually Rogue with a UE on the end. But it was for sale. I bought it. Wasn't particularly cheap. Now, a bit of bias was creeping in. I'd always thought these were pretty horrible things. I'd never had one, never picked one up, so I didn't know. I just looked at it and thought, ugh, you know, I can't see that being any good, despite the famous people that play them. And when it was delivered, I thought I'd been conned and I'd actually got an empty box, because when it was delivered and the postman gave it to me, it didn't weigh anything. This thing is really, really light, certainly compared to all the other guitars. And as I've got older, I've got a bit of a dodgy back, and that Fender is the heaviest of the lot, and that Fender 5-string. I'm not sure I could now stand up for an hour playing that, because it's very heavy. This, on the other hand, you don't even know you've got it. Well, they're quite pretty things, aren't they? I mean, you know, they're nice. But so I've got no way of knowing if a real Hofner sounds infinitely better than this, but I'm guessing this sort of copy is okay. And oddly, it sounds pretty good too. It's not a bad sounding bass. And all in all, it's got a pretty decent sound. Yeah, it's all right. I've never actually even played about with the buttons and things on here. I mean, some seem to switch it and make it sound worse. The settings it's on now seem to make it sound the nicest it is. I've not even bothered to take off the plastic stuff that's over the top of the pickups, so I don't know how long I've had it. As basses go, it's a bit strange. I mean, I don't know much about the Hofner originals, but this is sort of quite twee. I mean, sadly, I've scratched it as I tend to scratch most things, because I just don't look after them. But after all, they're supposed to be a tool, aren't they? But all in all, this, if you want to play bass and you want a reasonable sound and you want something that's lightweight, these things are well worth considering. I mean, fair enough, you've probably got to look like Paul McCartney to play them, but they actually are pretty good. Now, this copy, I mean, I have no idea what the copy's like compared with the original, because as I said, I've never played one of the originals, but I was really surprised by the actual sound of these. And you get used to the slightly shorter scale fairly quickly. It works pretty well when you palm mute it. I'm not sure. No, you probably can't do that too well on these, can you? But I mean, if you're playing music with pull-ons and I don't know, it's not going to work, is it? But as a straight bass, I mean, sorry, if you were probably playing in a jazz band, you get away with playing one of these things instead of an acoustic. All in all, it's not a bad thing. It's just something I'm not going to play all the time. So there we go. A run through my bass collection that I started in 1970 odd. God, a long time ago, isn't it? Good job I'm ancient now. I've never really been one to follow the trends. I just buy things that I like and use them. If I don't like them very much, well, you know, within a couple of weeks I might be tempted to get rid of it, but it's never happened. All of the basses that I've bought, I've actually managed to use. There's no point in me actually giving you sort of comparisons like we usually do, because you know these are all different. You can't really compare two of these together because they're just different. All of them are playable. A few of them you could play on a lot of different genres. The PV, for example, it can handle pretty well everything, apart from if you really need to beat it hard. It just can't do it because the action's too low. The Fender can do heavy playing and quiet playing, but it's far more tiring to play. And all the other ones do a bit of both. The Fender and that PV are the one that I play all the time. Every single thing that I want to record or perform live on bass I can do with either the Fender or the PV. I could get rid of the others and not miss them. Well, I guess I'd probably miss having them. I wouldn't miss playing them, because the PV and that Fender seem to do everything that I need. So there we go. I've been playing bass badly for a very long time. So, you know, I suppose really I should have got better. About a year or two ago, I actually bought another cello, and I found it quite hard. So, you know, I've actually got a cello again. So I've gone from being about 14 and stopping it to now being in my 60s and playing it again. And sort of, you don't forget, things came back. the bit about playing with a bow. Yeah, you know, I haven't done that for like 50 odd years and I can still remember how to do it. It's very weird. Sadly, today is the first time in many years that some of these basses have actually had the dust wiped off. I hate to think how long it's actually been since I plugged that Landola in. Being honest, it's probably about 40 years. And it was very nearly in tune. You know, old basses just keep going on and on. A bit like bass players, really. See you on the next video. We've got some mics and things on their way, so we should have some other products to test. I found a few quite neat looking things. Hopefully they'll sound good, but some of them were so cheap that I suspect they might not. Anyway, that's for the next video. Look after yourselves. Take care.